Coming up, the U.S. Supreme Court will hear a case concerning the future of a 44-year-old law that defends Native children. And a new climate report says global warming is about to get much worse. Plus, she has spent decades in Hollywood. We're visiting with actress Sheri Foster Blake. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is a proud supporter of Indian Country Today. Students at Cronkite News and Gaylord College at the University of Oklahoma cover Indigenous communities together. This important work is distributed by more than 100 news organizations. This collaboration provides a much-needed boost to coverage of Native American communities nationwide. Learn more at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Ku'atsi Hopa. Thank you for joining us. We start with news from Washington, D.C. The United States Supreme Court has agreed to hear Texas versus Holland, a case that seeks to overturn the landmark Indian Child Welfare Act, also known as ICWA. The basis of ICWA is to keep Native adoptees with Native families, and before the law was created, Native children were being taken from their homes and placed in institutions or with families who were not Native. This case comes as a number of states and individuals sued the federal government over the law, saying it was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear the case after requests from the Biden administration. On Monday, Native organizations and leaders spoke out, saying that ICWA is the gold standard in child welfare policy and that a negative Supreme Court decision will have consequences that are felt for generations. The High Court will hear the case's opening arguments in October, and we'll have more on this story later in our newscast. As tensions rise in Ukraine, Native leaders in the United States are speaking out to condemn the actions of Russian President Vladimir Putin. On social media, Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez said Navajo citizens stand ready to defend their country, but prayed the situation did not escalate further. In Oklahoma, Principal Chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hoskin Jr., said his nation knows how important the right to self-determination is, citing that Cherokees have been denied that right historically. The statements come as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky asked nations around the world to speak out against the war happening in his nation. Many Indigenous members of Congress called the attacks unprovoked. Representative Tom Cole urged U.S. lawmakers to do, quote, everything in our power to punish Putin, while Representative Mark Wayne Mullen said the world is watching as the violence unfolds. And in Minnesota, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan said she was praying for the children who are scared and for those who care for them. The founder of the United National Indian Tribal Youth Incorporated has died at the age of 83. Cherokee citizen J.R. Cook died on February 25th, according to the Unity organization. In 1976, Cook started Unity in southwestern Oklahoma. His idea was to find a group of Indigenous youth interested in becoming leaders within their communities. Executive Director Mary Kim Titla said his leadership and determination kept the organization alive.
He had a profound impact on more than 250,000 people directly. How many can say that when they leave this world, they've impacted that many lives? Not very many. He had a profound impact on my life. I didn't know when I met him in 1979 that life would come full circle and I would be filling his shoes.
Today, it is one of the oldest and largest Native youth leadership organizations in the U.S. and has more than 320 youth councils in 36 states across the country. And Unity did not release a cause of death. Well, an entrepreneur in Phoenix unexpectedly found her way into the art of making soap. ICT's Callie Benally has this report.
Yat she a Camilla Bigay Yini and Shia, 20 Junior Destiny Bushichin. Hello, my name is Camilla Savannah Bigay Bogart, and I am the founder and owner of the Nijoni Soap Company. We're also known as Nijone, and it means beautiful in Navajo. To be honest with you, I wasn't planning to be opening up a shop. It first started out as a coping mechanism for me after I lost my dad back in March in 2019. And I found soap making as a coping mechanism for me. And with it, I infused different herbs like Navajo tea, sweetgrass, sage, yucca, by that and tying my culture into it as well. And I started giving it to friends and family. They kept encouraging me to start selling it. So I sold downtown Phoenix for First Friday. My favorite part is naming the soaps because I get to share different parts of the reservation, and some of them actually do have deeper meanings, like the Shimmered Rose, which stands for my late great-grandmother. The Che's New Boots is a red leather scent, and it reminds me of my Che, who would always buy boots. And Res Dirt, my favorite bar, which has a scent of a dirt, and it takes me back home every time smelling it. A lot of thought and detail goes into the soap, of planning it first, picking what type of scent and smell I'm wanting, and if it's infused with herbs, I would go out to Cove, Arizona, and pick the herbs and infuse with it.
The founder of Nijoni Soaps encouraged others to pursue their passions just like she did. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, a new climate report shows that children living today will be significantly affected by global warming. But first, we're kicking off our series for Women's History Month by talking to a Native actress. Stay with us. March is Women's History Month, and we're celebrating it by featuring exceptional Native women. Today, we're taking you to Hollywood to talk to Sheri Foster Blake. She is an actress with a long list of credits to her name, including the very funny series The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt on Netflix, and TNT's Crazy Horse, where she starred opposite of Michael Grey Eyes. Sheri was also the narrator for the Emmy-nominated PBS series Great Performances that featured the American Indian Dance Theater. Let's take a look at some of her work.
So why do you keep coming back here?
I lied. I love it.
Those damn government schools did nothing but make us ashamed of ourselves. Well, don't blame me for you coming home.
It would make your father very happy to see you married.
Would it make you happy?
I'm not young.
I'm not so young either. You see how I am. And you know what they say. What a strange man our Crazy Horse is.
Not so strange to me.
You didn't say anything when you dyed your hair and when you got blue contact lenses, or even when you started saying things like neato and tennis.
It's how white people talk, Mom. Oi, gewalt.
But Manhattan? What did I do wrong with this one?
Well, don't blame yourself. I bet this is all Intome's doing.
Oh, you can't blame Iktomi for everything.
Intome farted.
Hello, Sheri, and welcome to the ICT Newscast.
OCO!
Let's just jump right in. I want to tell you that a fan favorite around the ICT newsroom is the unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. Tell us how you helped shape the dialogue in that show, because a lot of it really comes across as Native humor.
Well, the thing is, we had Native actors, so that always helps. And the production, the people, Tina Fey and Robert Carlock, the producers, were so generous and so wanted to be so right on with the language and with the characters. And it was a satirical comedy. And first, Indian country was kind of confused because there was a white woman playing an Indian, which of course we did want because we want, but it was a satirical comedy. So that worked for this particular series. But what was wonderful is they gave 2 Indian actors jobs, really good jobs with really good people to work with. I mean, the cast and crew were all just lovely. It was a great experience.
Take us sort of behind the scenes with those relationships in particular. I mean, it's not every day that you hear someone say, I get to work with Tina Fey.
Right? I was kind of like, I used to smoke. I don't smoke anymore, but I used to smoke. And I remember Gil and I were standing outside, and here she came up, and we both looked at each other, dropped our cigarettes, and she is lovely. She is just, she's really a lovely person. She doesn't put on airs. She is a great mother. She's really into her children. Her children would come to work with her. She was just a joy to work with, very down to earth.
Oh, yes, I can imagine. I want to switch gears a little bit. As I mentioned before, March is Women's History Month. Who are some Native women in particular that you look up to and want to highlight?
Oh, well, Wilma Mankiller, number one. I mean, what she's done for the nation is remarkable, and where she came from. So Wilma Mankiller, number one. And I think Tantu Cardinal, one of the great actors that we have of our time. I remember when I first met her with Dances with Wolves, she just brought us all into a circle. She's such an inspiration to all Native women. And she's just wonderful. And I've worked with her and a couple of times. And she's just the professional, but yet she's the human being when the cameras go off, always reaching. And in Canada, she's starting an acting conservatory for her people. So she's someone I look up to.
Both of them are just so iconic in Native communities. I can think of, a million different films that Tantu was in, and I agree with you. I'm totally a fan of hers as well. I want to switch gears and talk about Spirit Rangers. Tell us about what that project was like to work with so many Native people and also to do something like voice acting.
Oh, it was so exciting. When I got there, of course, every Native actor had the opportunity to do the show. I think I haven't seen the completed project, but when you get there, you do several. You do several characters, and the director's just saying, "Okay, do this," and you do it, and you're reading a screen, and you get all your emotions from flat-footedness, and it's wonderful. You're real free because you can flap your arms, you can do anything you want to get that character out there. So for me, and the camera's not on you, it's a joy. It was a joy. And to hear everybody, Wes Studi was doing it. I mean, I'm sure Tantu was also doing it, and Adam Beach. So it was a joy to work on that. Fun, fun, fun.
Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much. Wado.
The U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to hear Texas versus Holland, a case that has the potential to overturn the Indian Child Welfare Act. ICWA is a 44-year-old law that protects Native children and families. In April, a federal appeals court upheld the law and Congress's authority to enact it, but the judges also found some of the law's provisions unconstitutional, including preferences for placing Native children with Native adoptive parents and in Native foster homes. Sarah Kostelic is the executive director of the National Indian Child Welfare Association, and Dan Lorenz is an attorney with the Native American Rights Fund. Hi, Sarah and Dan. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Aaliyah.
Thank you, Aaliyah. Good to see you.
Sarah, let's start with you. Lay out the basis for us of this case and how it came to be.
Well, for the first time in 40-some years, a state sued the federal government over the constitutionality of the Indian Child Welfare Act. So the state of Texas was joined by some non-Native foster parents who are alleging that the Indian Child Welfare Act is based on race. Obviously, a fundamental misunderstanding about the basis of the law being tribal citizenship. So for the last several years, we've been working our way through the court system. And as you mentioned, just yesterday, the United States Supreme Court agreed to review this case.
Dan, tell us about the major question that the Supreme Court is going to decide in this case and who the major parties are that are involved.
Sure. The plaintiffs have alleged a variety of claims against the Indian Child Welfare Act. Probably the most consequential is their argument that the Indian Child Welfare Act distinguishes on the basis of race, that this statute gives a racial preference to Native people in the adoption of Native children and then disadvantages non-Native people. And the reason that argument is so problematic is it would be hard to distinguish any other Indian statute in the United States Code. If the Indian Child Welfare Act, which premises Indian child status on tribal membership, is a racial distinction, not only does that upset, and in 2 centuries plus of federal Indian law, but it might mean that literally every statute enacted for the benefit of Indians is unconstitutional. Now, there are a couple other claims as well. They argue that the Indian Child Welfare Act commandeers, is the language, takes federal authority where the state should be acting. They argue that the Indian Child Welfare Act delegates powers to tribes that only Congress can exercise. But the argument that's the most problematic is that equal protection argument.
Sarah, so many experts are saying, and Dan just said this as well, that the implications and the consequences of a negative Supreme Court decision are going to be felt for a very long time. Tell us some more about how that will impact Native families specifically.
Yeah, the implications are really staggering. The Indian Child Welfare Act was put in place 40-some years ago because of the practice at the time of the mass removal of children from their families, separating children from their families, from their communities, from their culture, even when no abuse or neglect was present. And so ICWA was put in place to put some guardrails around that, to halt that damaging practice. And so through the provisions of the law, ensuring that there are higher standards for the removal of Native children from their families, that when Native children need to be removed from their families to be safe, that they're placed first with extended family, then with other Native families in their community, then with other Native families of a different tribe. But all of these protections, although they were unusual at the time ICWA was passed, we've seen the rest of federal child welfare law actually become far more aligned with ICWA. So ICWA has been known as the gold standard of child welfare policy and practice. And we see the rest of federal child welfare law moving in that direction, becoming more and more aligned with ICWA, because we know that the provisions of ICWA are what are in the best interests of children, in the best interests of Native children, but also in the best interests of all children.
And that is exactly to keep Native children with Native families, because there's so much culture and familial connection tied to that. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, our families are the basis of our identity. Our connection to our community and culture gives us a sense of belonging, a sense of meaning in our lives, a sense of connection to something much larger than ourselves. We know that identity and culture is so important.
Dan, I want to go back to you. I want to talk about the potential of a new Supreme Court justice being able to decide this case. Tell us how the new appointment of a potential Supreme Court justice can play into this whole case.
I assume you're referring to the nomination of Judge Jackson, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, for this seat. And, it's hard to say. I don't think she has a lot of experience with federal Indian law, although she may have had a couple of cases come before her on the district court. But, each justice has to kind of take these things as they come. Most justices come to the Supreme Court without a lot of experience in federal Indian law. But by the time they've been on the court for a little while, they tend to get that experience pretty quickly. Federal Indian law makes up a disproportionately high share of the Supreme Court's docket. And so every year we have cases like this coming to the court, and the justices are getting a better and better education.
So I guess it's safe to say that at this point, we don't know her background in federal Indian law, but we'll just come to find out.
I think a lot of people are looking into that right now, yes.
Sure. Well, Sarah, we'll end with you. When you're speaking to Native families watching this interview, what is the one thing that you want them to take away from it?
I would say that ICWA is such a critical law to protect the interests of children and families, to ensure that connection we were just talking about. And yet it's such a little known piece of policy. So it's really important to talk about the Indian Child Welfare Act, to educate our neighbors, our family members, to talk in our community about this, because this is so impactful, as we said, for the whole future of federal Indian law, and making sure that that we continue to do our job in educating people about it and the importance of that law, continuing even to today. That's something we can all do.
Sure. Well, Sarah and Dan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
The data is clear. Climate change is going to get worse. On Monday, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a damning new report. It estimates that some children who will be alive in the year 2100 will likely feel 5 times the amount of floods, storms, droughts, heat waves, and other major weather events. ICT's editor-at-large, Mark Trahant, wrote about this new report, and he joins us now to help us break it down. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Aaliyah. Good to see you.
Give us a summary of this report and its findings.
Well, I think the main message is this, that we've got to start turning things around and having a decline in our fossil fuel emissions rather than continued increases. There's been a plan to try to get to, by 2030, have a reduction in fossil fuels, but every year it keeps growing. And the UN, this report is a exasperation saying, hey, people, we got to get moving.
And it's actually showing that we're just like small fractions of degrees away from major weather events. And that's how serious the situation is.
Absolutely. The metric has been 1.5 degrees warming by 2030, and we're going to sail past that. And if we get to 2 degrees warming centigrade, then the amount of flooding and real ordinary disasters that will kill millions of people are just stunning.
What was the response from Indigenous advocates about this report?
Well, Indigenous advocates have been very steady in their saying that we've got to start leaving fossil fuels in the ground and that we've got to make a consistent effort toward changing the paradigm. And this report just reflects that. And in fact, in a lot of ways, some of the Indigenous activists have been saying this all along. And this report is just confirming what's been said for really more than a decade.
Some of the other things that Indigenous advocates have said is that Indigenous communities will be hit first and hit the hardest. Tell us about some of those communities.
Yeah, there are so many Native communities that are going to be hit first and hit hard. And you have communities in the Arctic. The Arctic is probably experiencing the most demonstratable part of climate change right now, but also in Washington State and tribes along the coast, tribes in southern Louisiana and areas where there's going to be sea rise increase, but also forest fires and other calamities. Tribes are on the front lines of all of this.
Mark, speak to us frankly. Do you think that there's any real hope to turn this ship around and make some changes?
I think there's a lot of hope, and it starts with people saying the right thing and then actually acting on it. And I think we're at one of those inflection points. And I wrote last week about how the Ukrainian war with Russia's invasion, the natural inclination is for the president and government leaders to say, let's protect gas prices. Let's not let them rise. Well, maybe this is the moment to let gas prices rise, to say, we've got to change the way we do business. And every way we can, let's start taking those incremental or dramatic changes to happen.
When I was reading your story, which can be found on our website, I actually was surprised to know that a tribal nation in the United States actually plays a key role in these carbon emissions. Tell us about that.
Sure. One of the primary contributors to anthropologic climate emissions is coal. And of all of the fossil fuels, this is the one we know we need to get rid of now. The sooner, the better. And coal is essentially in decline in the United States. But Navajo has a transitional energy company that's been acquiring coal plants and coal mines and actually trying to increase coal production in order to save jobs in the Farmington and area primarily.
What has been the response of Navajo Nation officials to these clear science and data that shows that coal is, not beneficial for carbon emissions?
Well, they've said they need to protect the jobs, and perhaps that ought to happen in another way. Maybe there's a way to get a direct subsidy for the jobs, to look for other alternatives. This is what's so crazy about this whole climate change story, is that so many government officials and company officials, banks and others say exactly the right thing and then do the opposite. And this is an example of that.
Yeah, and I can imagine, and it almost feels like an all hands on deck situation at this point, and those conversations are only going to get more important.
Yeah, the stress is only going to increase, and the amount of change. I mean, at Navajo, for example, where you're already seeing it is the decline in water tables. You have communities that used to have running rivers that don't have them anymore. And we know we're in the West in a 2,000-year history drought. And if that's not a warning call, I'm not sure what is.
Definitely. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Leah.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.